Hi, I'm Dave McCaughan and my partner, Steve Sowerby. We welcome you back to our sometimes podcasts that we do a little bit irregularly, but always popular when we do them, on what matters to people. So this is an endeavor from the XPotential group to help marketers understand what's really important about the people that we're trying to market to. Well, the reason why we refer to it as people, not consumers, is a sort of long-held belief I've had that when we use the word consumers, we don't think about the people we're reaching. We only think about sales targets. And really, to be effective marketers, it's always about understanding real people. So today, we've got two great guests that are going to join Steve and I to talk about this from the aspect of what small businesses can learn from large businesses, what large businesses can learn from small businesses. But to borrow one of our guest terms, we're going to think about it in terms of outlier thinking. And the reason for that was because my good friend Pravin Shekar a few years ago started to lecture everybody he knew, including me, about the idea of being an outlier. And maybe Pravin will explain in a minute exactly what he meant by that. Pravin, as I said, has been a friend of mine for about 15 years. We know each other very well through the market research world. Pravin is a legend globally in the market research world, not only for being a very successful researcher himself in India, but also for his work for global professional bodies for market researchers, and for really trying to help change the perception of research marketers from being sort of dull and pedantic into being interesting people. Steve.
It's a tough ask, Dave. It's a tough ask.
It is.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing of Pravin's experiences. And as you were saying, I think the whole point of this webinar is really to try to see things differently. We've all gone through some major changes, and we need to think differently. The old rules really don't apply anymore in many cases, and with all of these changes, the time is now right to be able to get opinions from different people. So I'm very happy that we've invited also Valerie Lau to join us, and Valerie and I have been working together for something like 6 years, I think, Valerie. It's getting to that kind of time. And when Valerie and I started to work together, Valerie was leading the consumer healthcare section of marketing for Asia Pacific in Menarini, one of the really very interesting and high growth companies in the healthcare area. And now she's moved on to running a cluster of countries, including Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, and the e-commerce business for Menarini Asia Pacific. So really a big welcome to both Valerie and Pravin.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve and Dave. My pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you.
Hey, maybe if we start off, might be a good place to start, Pravin. If, you know, we've talked a lot about outlier marketing and outlier entrepreneurism. Can you just give us the 30-second snapshot of what that's about in your mind?
Sure. So in statistical terms, what is an outlier? You'd have seen a crowd and then one sole fool standing somewhere outside, right? So you have a crowd and you have one data point that's kind of away. That is an outlier. That person is an outlier. And in today's business, when the whole world is just a herd following, copying, going ahead, it is necessary for us to think, act, and be different consciously in everything that we do. And this thought and execution process is outlier thinking, outlier marketing. And that's in a crux that you've got to be different for the sake of being different and to pretty much differentiate yourself from the crowd, because we are moving into a world more and more of the personal brand pumping the company and the corporate brand. So that in a sense is outlier thinking.
Valerie, how does this work in this concept in larger organizations? Because you and I have talked a lot in the past about blue ocean thinking, which is a similar, if you like, the concept is in a similar direction. What do you think?
If you really look at the consumer, they have so much access to information. If we try to be a me too, right? We do all the research and we try to be me too to appeal to a broad group. We actually do not stand out. And for Menarini, because we came to Asia Pacific really late into the game, we believe the only way we can win is to do things very, very differently. And there are a couple of things that in my years here, I think a lot of people ask me why I spent so long with this company. And the whole thing is you almost feel that you're a boss, your own boss running a business, but you have a fixed salary.
Ah.
So it's like entrepreneur. I know some people call it that way, but I always like to say that imagine you are your own boss, but you get your annual leave, you get your fixed salary, and you get to do a lot of, take a lot of risk because you're running a business. And that's what it feels like to be Menarini.
Yeah.
It's a really good point. It's a really good example. It sort of reminds me, you know, when I worked for the big global corporation, I was lucky because I always point out the first 17 years I worked for that company, I didn't have a job description. And every few years it would come up, and obviously friends of mine from outside would say, "What do you mean you don't have a job description?" I said, "I work for a company that pays me every month, but they pretty much allow me to do whatever I want as long as they benefit from it." And I think that's a perfect example, if you like, of, you know, what Pravin talks about by an outlier, because it encouraged me to go and do within the world of big advertising agencies, do stuff that nobody else was doing. And they sort of said, hey, as long as it benefits the company, as long as we can see where it is, your check's going to come through, right? And you know, with it, and like you, Valerie, I'm sure there's been promotions along the way and recognition and all those other things, right? So, but I like this idea. When Pravin first started talking about this idea, before he wrote, and in the background, you know, you can see his books, right? So he's got about 300 books he's written. Most of them are pretty short. But the one about outlier marketing is quite interesting. And when he first started to promote that and talk about it at industry conferences and stuff, he always gave really small examples, like not even small companies, but like how individuals were using it to market themselves. But those examples, I think, Pravin, it's true to say, while you were talking about, you know, how somebody doing door-to-door sales for themselves could use outlier marketing to stand out, actually the model I just went, yeah, but that's true, you know, for any big corporate, for global corporations, you know, that if they encourage that, it's going to make a difference, right? So, I mean, maybe, Pravin, you could give us an example of, you know, one of those stories you're always telling about outlier marketing. It'd be really great.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, imagine India 30 years ago, when people had to rely heavily on public transport, and cars were a luxury. And there was this gentleman named Dandapani who was filling petrol in a petrol bunk, in a gas station. And that land area was sold. He was out of a job. And adjacent to the petrol bunk was a car service clinic run by the same owner. So, and both of them were sold. So Dandapani went and asked the owner that, I've got a huge family to feed. And the owner said, you've done a wonderful service. The customers love you. You can take whatever you want, but the place is sold. So he took the equipment, took it to his shack, set it up and set up his service center, went back to the same customers, found out the pain point, and his outlier thinking was, if you give it for a regular service, it takes 5 days. You got to use public transport to go, and you don't know when you're going to get the vehicle. I promise an overnight delivery. I'll come in the evening, pick up the car from your house, service it overnight, and give it back to you, ready for you to go to work. This was a concept that was absolutely new 30 years ago, a classic case of outlier thinking for the client, for his customer, providing a service which is faster, convenient to them. Yeah. And last check, there are a lot of big companies that have now started using this because customer is king. but the customer is the emperor for a really small entrepreneur. So that's one classic real-time example. And this gentleman, Dandapani, has now grown that he now only services Mercedes-Benz and has a staff of about 45 working for him.
Wow.
So that's an outlier story for you.
Very, very inspiring. And you describe in an individual where crisis forced him to change. And we've just gone through a period of, and we're still going through it, if we have to be honest, a period of crisis in so many different ways. It started with, of course, the pandemic. It then continues with geopolitical, economic, and so on and so forth. How does that really now start to change the way that we need to be thinking in companies? And maybe starting off with you, Valerie, in larger organizations, how does this affect the way that some of our medium and larger size companies and the individuals within those need to be operating?
A lot of people will tell you that, they are more data focused. They are definitely going full on with digital. But what I have seen, and a lot of people are giving more examples of that, but I think what I've seen that there's the greatest difference is speed. The speed is significantly faster. So if in the past, in order to do a launch, it takes a much longer time to come to a point of view. But because the market is very dynamic, and I remember during COVID, there were a lot of decisions. Do we launch? Do we not launch? When do we launch? Is this the right time? Is it going to be a lockdown? And finally, you realize that the speed has to increase. And the other thing I also noticed, definitely for Menarini, is that there is then a recognition that in order to get speed and quality of decision, there needs to be a lot of delegation of autonomy to the local market. Because they are the ones who know if tomorrow this is going to happen, this is what I want to do. And I've seen in where we operate, when we have very, very effective GMs who really take on and embrace autonomy, our business really, really booms. So speed and agility to be able to make decisions like that, rather than keep going back to HQ. I think these are the things that I've seen happen very, very frequently with COVID.
Right. So really trusting the GMs, the people in the countries with making decisions, going back to almost what you're talking about, Pravin, getting them to be owners of their business and making decisions around them. Pravin?
Absolutely. And I'm going to give you two examples or analogies here. And this is something I read in a book, that the Van Halen band, whenever they go ahead for concerts, their contract is really thick and detailed, which included that backstage there needs to be a bowl of M&Ms, but no brown M&Ms. And so the first thing that, because a lot of sound equipment, everything had to be top-notch and to the point, and everything was listed down on the contract with this odd element as well. And their logic being, this comes in the 24th page, somewhere in the middle. And if the person had not read it and the bowl has just M&Ms, including brown M&Ms, it is likely that they've made a mistake somewhere else. Right? So that's one example, which I'm relating to what Valerie and you said just now, Steve. What is happening with the resources today? There is the rise of what I call the tethered gig associate. So it's not freelance, it's not hybrid. There is a tethered gig because the associates who want to freelance but still don't have the courage to jump over across the ship. So if my expense this month is $1,500, can I have a retainer? Can I have a tether to guarantee I've got the $1,500, which gives me half the time to go ahead and experiment? And post-pandemic, these people are coming out openly and talking to HR saying, hey, I need this money. This is the number of hours that I can commit. And I call it the tethered gig, that they're still tethered to the company, but they want to experiment the gig economy. And the reason I gave the Van Halen contract is when you know what needs to be done right down to the point, then the outcome is with the associate. And more this is happening. I'm not calling it hybrid. I'm not calling it work from here, but they want a minimum guarantee, but the company also has a request that some of the specifics have to be done. So that's what I term from an outlier thinking concept as the tethered gig economy, and we need to be ready for it, big or small.
Yeah. Interesting that, because I think what holds us back in larger organizations, and I was very, very fortunate to be working in one of the large organizations in my career, is actually you're in many cases in the past trained to be very conservative because there is a lot of risk associated with it. But actually there's a lot of risk associated by not doing anything and not pushing out the boat, as we've seen. And that causes, an inertia, which is really difficult to get moving as well. All right. So how has this pandemic really affected the smaller companies, Pravin? Because yes, we've seen it affect the larger companies, as Valerie has said, but when everybody has to change, how does entrepreneurs and startups be even more different when there is such change going on in the environment?
Oh, I take a positive view to it, Steve. I think Surf Excel came with a contrarian ad that dirt is good. Well, I'm telling you, these constraints are good for the small entrepreneur because we are anyway working in frugality. We've got to do more with less even before. Now we have to do more with lesser. That's the bedrock of creativity. And if you ask me, the outlier entrepreneurs, the creative entrepreneurs, in India, we have a term called jugaad. Now, jugaad is when there is a way to do things, but there's some way I get it done. So that get it done mentality has risen always to save the smaller entrepreneur. That is my answer to you.
Yeah, no, very good. Valerie will know, and Dave as well will know. I often say to the teams that we're working with, the best marketeers are those that have no budget or no resource. Valerie loved that because she then looked at her marketeers and said, right, I'm going to take away all of your budget. You need to get it done. And that mentality is really powerful if we can get it done. Dave, please.
Yeah, well, just to follow up on that, two things. One is that, I've been fortunate, all jokes aside, I've been fortunate to hear Pravin do his preaching about this for a number of years in front of all sorts of audiences. And what always interests me is people from big companies listening to this or responding to this in some way when they've read his book or whatever, right? Now, the people from big companies seem to fall into two big lumps. There is the big lump that says, that's really interesting for small companies, right? And then there's the other lump, which I dare say Valerie falls into, which goes, yeah, good idea, right? If it works for a small company, why can't it work for a big company? I mean, one of the things that I think the last 3 years has taught us is you can't rely on the budget. And so what's been really powerful, right? I mean, Valerie's nodding her head because I'm sure her budget's been slashed all over the place, right? And her headquarters in Florence rings up and says, no way, you can't do that anymore. And the first reaction we all have when we're told we've got less money than we did last month or last week is, oh my God, I can't do it. And yet somehow millions of companies around the world actually, I won't say benefited from the last 3 years because that probably sounds incorrect, but they not only survived, many grew in different ways, and many grew in ways they hadn't expected to grow 3 years ago, right? Plans got torn up, etc., because they were forced to think differently. And I think this whole idea of, it goes back to something that also Valerie said early on, when you're working for any organization, or when it's your own organization, or as Pravin said right at the beginning, you want to be the guy out there, right? And we all end up admiring the guy that was out there. And there's lots of mythologies about the Steve Jobses of the world and, the Elon Musks, and whether you like those guys or not. There was a point where we all went, he's a whack job, right? And we thought they were whack jobs because they were out there doing something that everybody else went, that's ridiculous. That's not going to work, right? Well, ups and downs a bit, but lots of those, the people we seem to admire, and I do a lot of research on over going back to nearly 30 years on who is it that people admire. Now, it's amazing to me that over that 30 years, it's always been sports people. In nearly every country, sports people come up near the top.
Okay.
But the other thing over the 30 years is the growth of what we now call big-time entrepreneurs, billionaire entrepreneurs. I remember it back in 1999 doing a survey in India about that, and Bill Gates was number one against all age groups that we surveyed. And it was shocking. The client, I won't say who the client was, it was the world's biggest soft drink company. But the client was absolutely shocked because they thought it was going to be a cricketer because it was India.
Right. Yes.
And they were shocked and they said, that can't be right. And we went back and we interviewed a bunch of people and, you know, kids in high school, students at university, new grads, even middle-level managers are sort of like, yeah, but that guy created something out of nothing. That's fantastic, right? Now, it timed because it suited India at the time because that was going through the big changes of the economy and opening up, etc. But that same thing across Asia, I found in country after country after country. And Valerie will have seen this, right? Just in the business world, how, you know, it used to be a case of if you were going to sponsor somebody, if you were going to use somebody as a spokesperson, the fallback was a celebrity in terms of it was going to be a movie person or a singer or something like, or an actor, right? But today you see it's all sorts of people, right? Because we tend to, and today a lot of it, and without being negative about, you know, whether you're a spokesperson or whatever, it's often about people that have some way stood out and done things differently. And they get acknowledged for that, right? And we go, yeah, okay. I may not do that, what they say, but I admire the fact they did it. So what, you know, that's a good enough piece of advice. Yeah. It's interesting stuff.
Very good.
Oh, absolutely, Dave. That we look for quirks. We look for something that stands out. And I have a really quick example to give you. One of the companies I've invested in had to be at a conference, and they approached the conference organizers. They said all sponsorship slots are full. But this guy goes, the marketer goes and says, I've got $1,000. Can we create something? And you know, Dave, you're going to love this. They created and got the sponsorship for that conference. They were the toilet sponsor of the conference. They sponsored the toilets. It was plastered. I mean, everybody has to go to the loo at least 3 or 4 times in a conference. And they were right there creating their own booth. So how can you stand out? I mean, even when you sit down, you've got to stand out here.
Stand out while you're sitting down. I love that. And anyone who doesn't know, Dave has some extremely interesting observations about the world of toilets. So that's why I went. So please look it up.
Outlier thinking, Steve. Outlier thinking. You know? Outlier
thinking. Brilliant. Valerie, a question for you. You talk about this sort of, you know, thinking outside the box, speed. You talked about driving the decision down to general managers and people in the markets. And sometimes the word agility is used and maybe misused in many organizations. First of all, what's your definition of agility in big organizations, and what examples or experiences or thoughts do you have in terms of how we promote agility in our larger organizations?
If I ask my 6-year-old son, now 8, he will say agility is no rules, just run, right? Just run at the top of your speed. And I think this is what a lot of people tend to think, but agility is about understanding what the rules are. And if the rules are wrong, changing the rules so that you can get to the destination as fast as you can, but safely. So there, I mean, of course, you can get a bit of bumps, but you have to get to the destination safely. And I think what this whole process has given us because of the pandemic, the rules keep changing, is that in the past, I've been in other organizations and they have a lot of SOPs. When rules change, they change their SOPs, they keep changing SOPs. And actually, if you think about it, they make you very rigid. But what I have seen that really make the difference, it's not about setting new SOPs, it's about giving them some guidelines, you know, the no-go zones. And then let them run, you know, because everybody has a goal that's specific. Your goals are very clear. And people have a safety net to know that let's try to the best of our ability. And there's a safety net, even if I fail, I'm not going to be crucified. I think you will over time, you will increase agility. But in summary, agility is about making sure you get to the end goal faster than anybody else and in a good quality manner, right?
Yeah.
And if you ask me, we have a lot of products that we want to register. And in the past, it's always the conventional, okay, we do this, we do this, we do this. And again, with COVID, there's a lot of questions to say, why must we follow the process? Why can't we leapfrog? And the short answer is because nobody thought about it, right? And we have a lot of launches where people told us, I'm saying it's premature because it's still in the midst of pandemic. And then I was looking at this. We have a product investment decision in one market. And we wasn't sure. We said, oh, it's pandemic. It's very dangerous. We're going to double down. This is the time when everybody's saving money, right? But kudos to the GM. He said, no, let's try. So we had a pot of money. We tried it. And today, the brand is the single biggest consumer brand in that. Wow. And has grown 4 times since pre-pandemic. Think about it. It's about being able to, I think, if you think about it, snowflakes, right? If you don't think it's spring when you see the first spring dews. You actually prepare for spring when you see the last snowflake. So, and I think this is what agility is, preparing before it really happens and going for it, investing in advance.
Right.
And that's something that I feel a lot of companies, because they want to feel safe, I will wait for spring to arrive, check the weather.
Yeah.
I will invest. But agility is doing it ahead of competition.
Competitors. Right. And really having that courage. I love that example that you gave, and really, people standing up and saying, yes, I am prepared to take the risk. I have the courage of the convictions of knowing the market and feeling this is the right direction. Very good. Dave, please.
Yeah, so I was thinking about, the context of this series of podcasts that Steve and I are doing is about this thing about people, not consumers, right?
Yeah.
And realistically, when I first started talking about this quite a long time ago, everybody used to shake their heads, right? Now, in the last 3 or 4 years, before COVID, what I started to see, going to many, many market research industry conferences, many of which Pravin was at as well, but also marketing conferences, the trade press, the trade media. I started to see in recent years a big switch where people are now, okay, let's think about people, right? Let's think about who we've got to reach as people, like all of their interests, all of their concerns, not just, oh, I've got a sore knee, so I need a pill to fix my sore knee, but what's the bigger issue going on, or what's important in their lives, right? And I think that's part of this whole idea of being an outlier, right? I mean, the toilet stories that I tell, there's a long history that I won't go into. Pravin remembers the first time I ever did that at a global conference, that story. The reason I did that was to specifically be an outlier. I told that story to make a point about social media, but I didn't talk about the social media that most people think of, like Facebook or LinkedIn. I talked about toilets as social media. And the reason I did that was to not be like everybody else. What's interesting is, all jokes aside, 10 years later, I still get emails and phone calls from people, hey, I saw you give that speech. What about this, right? Can you help with this? And it's because there's something that's stuck in their heads. And as marketers, right, and, the premise here is that we're all marketers and the audience is marketers. I always think that's primarily what you want to be doing, right? If you want to be doing something that everybody else is going, that was really memorable. Yeah. I don't actually remember the details. I don't need to remember the details. I remember that thing that made me want to know more, or made it stick in my
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear from both Valerie and Pravin, you know, what you think of that as marketers and thinking about what's going to make people remember, right?
I still remember, Dave, when you gave that talk and there was a commode on stage.
Yes, I
can't
sat on a
unsee it.
toilet the whole time I gave the
can't-
speech to 1,000 people. Yes.
I can't unsee it. And that's right there,
That-
which is the very purpose of your talk. Now, I come from a world, the world of Seth Godin, where marketing is all about making positive change happen.
Yeah.
And you spoke about agility, a smaller company, and I'm going to give another very short story of Vidya. Now, she is a project manager who was given the task of creating beeswax wraps as a social entrepreneurship venture for people with spinal cord disabilities. The previous project manager took 2 months to come up with a PPT. She was given 3 weeks and she had the product ready in 3 weeks. When I asked her how, she went on Amazon, ordered the competitor products, shortlisted the best, called the CEO straight and said, I'm working on a course, but I'm not able to get the formula right. And the CEO of a competing company understood the cause and gave her the formula stating, you are in this state, don't use jojoba oil, use this oil, get it done.
Mhm.
And in 3 weeks, she got the formula right. She went to her neighborhood tailor and asked him for all the surplus cloth that was there. And this is a mix of agility, outlier marketing, and execution that in 3 weeks, the product prototype was ready. I mean, who would think of calling the competitor CEO and asking for the formula and that person giving it, right? So this is what I call, to answer to your earlier question, Steve, the scrappiness quotient. Big
Yes.
company or small company, which of your associates has this scrappiness quotient?
Yeah.
Because you need such agile people who are focused more on getting it done rather than coming up with a process document that everything has to check in.
Yeah.
So that is my answer to your question.
Yeah.
Valerie, over to you.
I think of two things, right? And I think the first thing is, in the past, we tend to look at competitors as competitors, but increasingly, because of the speed, you realize that you can't do everything in-house. It's not about build anymore, right? In the past, we tend to build this, we do this, but now with the ecosystem thinking, there is a need for you to collaborate with your competitors. But I think the biggest difference, to make a difference, is to listen more intensely. We listen to the human voice, right? In the past, we tend to think of research as listening, but that's very artificial. I mean, you think of your last few times you went into a research, it's what you want to answer. It's not real. And increasingly, I find to really be outlier marketing is really go in to listen to what is a chatter out there and find out what people are talking about or what they are not talking about. And with the ecosystem, with enough community, you find something. But the first purpose is talk and listen to a real human. Don't hide behind numbers.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very important. And unfortunately, we have trained many of our marketeers to not to rely, but to read numbers, not to create insights, not to listen, not to understand. Because unless we really listen and we really understand, we won't know what matters to people. And if we don't know what matters to people, we will not change their lives for the better, right? We will create Me Too products. We will create communication that changes nothing but spends lots of money, which ultimately the consumer is paying for, because that's where the funds are coming from. And I think that's really a very sad situation. So, Valerie, how do we change cultures in big organizations so that we can have this scrappiness that Pravin was talking about? I love that idea of, being able to sort of get in the dirt and really scrap and really fight and learn and, do what you really believe in doing. Valerie, how do we do this in large organizations?
I think first and foremost is you must have sufficient number of leaders who truly believe, not those who hide behind, this is our new cultural statement, let's follow it and graze it at the kickoff, and thereafter let's look at KPI, right? I think first is enough leaders to believe in the cause and to constantly talk about it and demonstrate places where you succeed and places where you didn't succeed, and talk about it, say, okay, we tried this, we didn't do it, but we learned something. And over time, when people see that, oh, the big boss is encouraging us to try, and so failed, and he's still here, he's being recognized, he's being rewarded. Maybe it's not so bad, because I find human beings trying to, they want to make sure they're safe. And you get a lot of people who talk about, let's be agile, but when it comes to the crunch, things doesn't always happen this way, right? You're the next one on chopping board. But I think leaders need to really believe, speak about it, promote it, and be very conscious about rewarding even some of the lessons and not crucifying failures. I think this is very conscious. Otherwise, it takes a lot of courage. It takes, especially in Asia, it takes so much courage to play our boss. Guess what? I have a better idea. Let's try.
Or else I have another idea. It's not exactly. Dave, please.
No, I was just going to say, Valerie, as you were just talking then, and from what you said earlier, you raised again the word agile. And what has always worried me since, I'm sure we can be honest, we've all been in business a long time. So we remember that this word agile only really came out of the blue about 5 years ago, right? It's a bit like I always point out the word, when I worked in the market research and advertising industry in the 80s and the early 90s, the word insight did not exist. Nobody used the word insights, right? It only came really into the language after 2000. And then suddenly it went from being an insight, and you only ever can find one insight, to, oh no, I've done a survey of 1,000 people and I've found 55 insights for you, which is impossible, right? The same thing is, it's the same thing with agile. Agile 5 years ago suddenly went from meaning being very flexible to being super fast. And what I liked about the way Valerie's talking about this is, as you said earlier, it's not about doing it extra fast. It's finding a way to be the first to do it, right? Or to do something very different fast. So just speeding up the old process isn't the point of agility. It's about finding a different way to do it to get to the objective, right? And I really like having that discussion, because I get involved in too many arguments with clients who basically are telling me, well, the reason I did this piece of research is because it can get done in 24 hours. And you're going, yeah, but it's not actually, it's just doing the research faster. It's not helping you get anywhere, right? Just you've sped up the process without changing the end result or changing what you're trying to do. On that point, I'd just like to ask Pravin, because I know, and you know, Pravin, in the market research industry, we've seen a lot of change in recent years because of technology and the way people can do market research. And for those of you that won't know this, Pravin spent 18 months as the head of the world's biggest market research industry group called SMR. And he stepped in at a vital time to do a great job. But looking at just market research, Pravin, what do you see as things that have changed in the last few years, not because of COVID, just the last few years, that are really helping the outlier marketer actually get somewhere?
So before I answer your question, there's something I've read and I'm paraphrased, that there are 3 stages to an idea. The first stage, when you hear, our brain automatically says, what a nonsense idea. The second time you hear it after 6 months when somebody's done something with it. It's a nice idea, but it won't work here. And the third time when you see 3, 4 other people making a success out of it, then you'll say, I always knew it was a good idea. And the fourth stage is when you go take a selfie with that person who made the idea bigger. And bringing it back to answer your question here, technology is changing, the world is changing, but what is also changing is the polarization here. We've got a lot of young people and a lot of old people, and the way you approach and work with them is quite different. Regardless of, Dave, for example, you were telling about advising a bank on how to deal with the silver surfer generation from a digital perspective. Well, it is a similar challenge that we have in the world of market research. One, of course, is to navigate the word play, insights and agile and now ChatGPT and whatever is a fad that is coming in. But to me, Dave, to answer your question, it is going back to the basics, to the fundamentals. Why are we doing what we are doing? And then comes the how. So you will have DIY, you will have a whole lot of people, including some personalities who claim, I don't do market research, but that's not true. So it goes back to the basics, the fundamentals, knowing why you need to do, and then the how will follow automatically. The how is the technology part. The how is something that will call it machine learning or blockchain or whatever is the new fad. We had big data, which is now fallen out of favor with the fad kings. So those wins will come and go, but who is the rogue team? And it is, if you, and a rogue in the positive sense here.
Yes.
If you analyze the winners of the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm talking about those who will also withstand the stock market barreling that's happening, are those who have gone rogue within their companies, taking an idea and taking it through to conclusion. As Valerie said, it's necessary for them to take it through to a completion. And a slightly long-winded answer, but that's what I personally believe in, that the fundamentals always wins.
Good point.
I should say, Dave and I have known each other well over, it's coming up to 30 years, I think, Dave. Very, very frightening fact, but there we go.
Steve was in elementary school at the time.
I was a young general manager, and some crazy strategy planning guy from my agency came along and said, you should really be listening to what your consumers, we were still using that word at the time, are thinking, feeling, and behaving. And I was like, oh, really? And he infected me with this passion for deeply understanding who we are talking to and what it is that they need rather than what it is that you want to sell to them. And there's a very different thing. Pravin, please.
What matters to people? And I'll combine what you said just now, Steve, and what Dave said is another live example of a new author who had self-published, and he gave a challenge to a marketer that you need to sell 100 books in the next 1 week. Now, bringing market research into it, the first protocol would be to go talk to the bigger stores. You know what this marketer did to achieve it? Found the insight as to where are people buying. This happened right after the second lockdown when people were just coming out. And what this particular marketer did was approached all the secondhand shops and placed the first-hand book in the middle. So you had Dan Brown on the left, John Grisham on the right, and this particular author's book right in the middle, because he knew the insight. People were still trying to save money, but they wanted any non-digital form of entertainment. And what's the first port of call? The friendly neighborhood secondhand bookstore, which was all populated with brand new books. So that's closing the loop from a market research as to that's the objective. This is the insight. That's what we did, and that's the outcome. So closing the loop there. What matters to people?
What matters to people? Dave, please.
Well, with that in mind, we got a question from somebody in the audience, Mary, and I'll read it out, right? I knew this question would come. How do we find out what our customers want when they don't often know? You know, sort of David Ogilvy's quote was, people don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say, right? And of course, this is the bane of the market researchers world, is where clients will ask the question like, you know, do people want it brown or red? Well, they don't know because they've never seen it before, right? And the point being that the smart clients I found don't ask me to ask the obvious questions. You know, when I used to do a lot of work for toothbrush brands all over Asia, as it turned out, the smart marketers did not ask me to ask people about why they preferred one toothbrush to another. Because the reality of it is that 99.999% of the world has no idea why they prefer one toothbrush to another technically, right? Yeah. What we did was we asked people about what's important about having a good smile. What's important about having great fresh breath? What happens when you're really close to people, right? And that's the thing where you get to, and the old thing about oral care was the breakthrough that happened about 50 years ago when they figured out that oral care has nothing to do with antibacteria. That's just the subtext. The real thing is kissability, right? That have I got a mouth that somebody wants to kiss? And some brands, like some of the Unilever brands, have been very direct at that. Still in India, Unilever oral care brands use the KISS methodology or KISS technique to sell. But all brands recognize it's about interpersonality. That's what's important to people. And the fact that I have to have bacteria-free teeth. Okay, I'll do that. And give me the toothbrush and the toothpaste that will get me there. But I don't want to be offensive to people. I want to be kissable to people, right?
Right.
So you'd never have got that by saying, do you prefer this brush or this brush, and tell me why, right? That doesn't work. And I'd just like to hear from you both, Valerie and Pravin, about, when you talk about being an outlier marketer, how do you get to the difference? How do you get to that piece of knowledge, that insight, if you want to call that thing that's going to allow you to break out, be different?
Yeah.
So if you ask me for an idea, I will try to write down 100 ideas, because the first 20, 25 are the ones that will come automatically, that we've been conditioned in, which is what the rest of the world will also come through. So when you strain your brain that much more with what else, not necessarily what is it different that I would need to do. But when you continue to strain the brain and you reject the first 20, 25 that comes, that's when the gold comes in. And then you have to test it and work through. A lot of people lose patience after the first 5. I've given you 5 ideas, go work with them. What is it? What are you doing? And that's what I call going against the grain deliberately. That's when any good, different idea that is executable will come. Otherwise, the top of mind that we are relying on for ideation is just what any other person would get.
Yeah, it's me too. Valerie, what would you recommend in terms of getting people to think differently in this?
I think probably we have to recognize as marketers, as people, we don't look at the categories the same, right? I mean, think about the piece of bread that you ate for breakfast this morning. Do you remember the brand? Why do you choose it? Versus maybe for ladies, think of the skincare brand that you think. And so the involvement of different categories is different. So because of that, the way marketers, but we've been taught in school that research is the same across board. I tend to think that you need to ask what role it plays in the eyes of the people. And if it's a very low involvement product, you get nothing. Like, do you like your salt to be purple versus blue versus green? Nobody cares, right?
No.
But
Right.
marketers engaged by a salt company will have to make such decisions. But so I think that to look at it is to then ask, what role does this product play in the role of the consumer, the purchaser, before you start to think about, should I even do research? Because sometimes the consumers, you're right, they don't know because it doesn't matter to them. But if it matters and it's high involvement, you get a lot more. So I think the first question as marketers is, do we know if our products are low or high involvement before you go into any other work?
Yeah. No, very good. Very good. I was also going to say, I think you mentioned it, Pravin, in terms of course, you brainstorm all of these ideas and what have you. But one thing I also think is an essential approach is be open and question, and always ask why or how or what or who, and what does this really mean, and how could I make it differently, and never stop asking, keep asking. And out of that will come even more ideas and even more opportunities. But if you don't ask the question, you stop at the first answer, you will never change and you will never create something differently. So this ability to be super curious about people, about what they do, why do they do it? Oh, that's really interesting. Why would you do that? And really, we said it right at the beginning. I think, Valerie, you said it. Research just at the moment just gives you the answers that you want, whereas research should be a tool that really goes into the psychology of the people that you're listening to and really helps you to understand them as individuals, about what it is that they want and need in terms of how they want to live their lives. Dave, any ideas more on that?
Good point. I just want to listen. I know we're going to run out of time soon, so I just want to ask both of our guests a question, right? Which is, having spent a great 50 minutes or so talking about this, having discussions about it beforehand, Valerie, Pravin, can you just give us, the 60-second, what have you learned, or what do you learn from looking at small businesses that you can apply into your business, which is, as Steve said, a large pharmaceutical company, et cetera, global company. And then I'll ask Pravin to do the opposite. What can small businesses learn from, the Unilevers, the Menarinis of the world? Valerie.
One thing I've heard from Pravin is keep your overheads really, really low. And I think it's a discipline, right? Because, and this is what happens in big companies. We build infrastructure and we are not agile. So this is maybe the key thing. And in whether good times, bad times, you never have to lay off people. Never. That's the one thing I've learned. And second thing is think always of yourself as the boss of your job.
Right.
We always think that we are part of the packing order, but actually you are the boss of your job.
Great point.
I am the boss for my job.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
I think this is what I've learned from Pravin.
That's great. Pravin.
What can we learn from big companies? I'm going to give you a real life case of Unilever. When the whole world is spending on social media, they wanted to reach out to the media dark parts of India, which didn't even have, they had one communal TV station. How do they reach to these people? They created a rogue team that experimented, explored, and set up a radio station for the media dark folks, giving them entertainment and plugging in the Unilever ads in the middle. I mean, large company can do it, but so can a small company setting up a small rogue team and executing it. So that's something that I would learn. The rogue team was working under constraints, under frugality, and the whole might of will it work? Well, that's something that as a small company we'll need to learn how to effectively plan that campaign within the constraints and getting it done. When they can do it, so can I at a much lower scale. But that would be my take on it. And to answer to the previous comments by Steve and Dave, here's a little song I wrote. When the world goes one way, you got to go the other, because the loony, zany, crazy make them your mother, because the ideas will come in from such people.
You never fail. You never fail. We're just about out of time. Steve, what do we always ask our guests to do in the last couple of minutes?
What advice would you give? So again, 60 seconds, your advice to the audience of how we can navigate this ongoing challenges that we're facing with the current environment. So Valerie, what would be your 1, 2, or 3 key pieces of advice for the audience that's watching?
Because if you follow, you will never make it to the goal.
Right.
It's faster.
Very good.
Okay.
Right. So don't just follow. Don't be that sheep, if you like, just following everybody else. You need to really think and act differently. And Pravin, what would be your
what you need is already within you or around you. David versus Goliath. David had only one stone and a sling, but he had years of practice with it, and all he needed was one shot. So what matters most to each of you is to be an outlier marketer. Use what you already have within you and around you, and use that to make a competitive point of difference, a continuous point of improvement.
Fantastic. Excellent. And that applies whether you're in a big company or whether you are just starting off on your own in the first few days of a new idea, a new company or a new project that you're starting with. You can use that exact approach. Very good. Dave, any last words from you?
Well, obviously, I thought this was a great discussion, and we could go on forever. I really like the idea of looking at this as you know, Pravin has given us a lot of great examples of really small niche things that people have done, right?
Yeah.
But I really like the idea that Valerie raised of you take ownership yourself, look to do something different, and be brave enough to tell the organization, to tell whoever you're partnered with, no, we got to try this other way. And don't be constrained by the rules that the company has in place or that the marketplace has in place. Just go for it, right? And as we said before, be agile in the sense of finding a different way to get there, because quite often that will allow you to stand out on its own. I think that was really great.
Yeah. And I would just build on that. And I think you really need to take personal responsibility to live that agility. Don't wait for someone to give you permission to be agile. You know, don't pay lip service to it. Take personal responsibility. If you believe in it, there is something very powerful there. So really apply that. So I think we've reached the end of our time. It's actually on the hour, perfect timing. So from my side, Valerie, really lovely to spend an hour with you. And Pravin, fantastic to meet you online for the first time. Looking forward to meet you in Bangkok next week. But thank you from my side. Dave, always a pleasure to spend time with you. Any last words to close us off?
Thanks to Valerie. Thanks to Pravin. It was great discussion, guys. We could go on forever, as I said. Steve, you know, we get a great response to these things. And I think the value of these sessions is exactly what we talked about today. It's just getting people to think a little bit outside of the norm because we get some great guests in there. So thanks everybody else for listening. Thank you to our guests. Thanks, Steve. And we'll have another What Matters to People session coming up soon.